The morning sun created bright patterns through the space station's reinforced windows as Na-young adjusted her crisp uniform for the third time that morning. The fabric felt especially stiff today, much like her resolve to maintain perfect order in her domain. As the office manager of Stellar Communications Hub on Station K227, she took great pride in running the most secure and efficient front desk in the entire Korean Space Administration. The large digital clock on her holographic display showed 7:45 a.m. station time. Na-young allowed herself a small smile as she watched the early morning staff trickle in through the security gates. Each person showed their identification badges with practiced ease, and she greeted them with the same practiced efficiency she had maintained for the past 15 years. "Good morning, Senior Engineer Lee Jin," she said, nodding at the older man who always arrived precisely at 7:45 a.m. "Morning, Na-young," he replied, scanning his badge before shuffling toward the elevator banks. The lobby of the Stellar Communications Hub sparkled under the artificial lighting. Its walls, a perfect blend of traditional Korean design and modern space station architecture, rose 30 meters high, creating an atmosphere of grandeur that Na-young thought perfectly suited the station's importance. After all, this wasn't just any office. It was the primary link between Earth and the growing number of Korean colonies in the Centaurus sector. At her desk, Na-young had arranged everything with military precision. Her nameplate sat at exactly the right angle, her digital screens were arranged in perfect symmetry, and her personal items were minimal but meaningful. A small potted plant that her mother had engineered to thrive in artificial light, and a photograph of her receiving the Excellence in Security Management Award 5 years ago. The morning routine continued smoothly as more employees arrived. She knew each face, each schedule, and each security clearance level by heart. There was Do-ha from accounting, always wearing his lucky red tie. Behind him came Myrae from the communications division, her silver implants glinting under the lights. Na-young's database confirmed their identities with quiet chimes as they passed through the security gates. At 8:15 a.m., she began her first security sweep of the day. Her fingers danced across the holographic keyboard, checking the night shift logs. Everything was in order, just as she liked it. The overnight team had processed 17 communications from the colonies, all properly logged and encrypted. No security breaches, no unauthorized access attempts, and no suspicious activities. Na-young was so absorbed in her work that she almost missed the sudden change in the lobby's atmosphere. The regular employees, who usually moved with purpose toward their destinations, were slowing down, their attention drawn to something, or someone, approaching the main entrance. She looked up from her screens and saw him. A tall black man in an expertly tailored charcoal gray suit was walking through the main doors. His presence immediately stood out in the predominantly Korean space station. The suit looked expensive, real Earth-made fabric, not the synthetic materials most people wore on the station. He carried himself with confidence, his shoes making soft clicking sounds on the polished floor as he approached her desk. Na-young's spine straightened even more, if that was possible. In 15 years, she had memorized the face of every person authorized to enter this building. This man was not one of them. Her right hand moved automatically to the security alert button under her desk, while her left pulled up the day's appointment schedule. The man smiled as he reached her desk. It was a warm, genuine smile that didn't quite match Na-young's mental image of an intruder, but she had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. "Good morning," he said in perfect Korean, though with a slight American accent. "I'm here too. Do you have an appointment?" Na-young cut him off, her voice carrying the professional crispness she had perfected over the years. The man's smile didn't waver. "Actually, I don't need one. Sir," she interrupted again, her tone growing firmer, "this is a secure facility. No one enters without proper clearance and a scheduled appointment." She gestured to the large sign behind her that listed the security protocols in both Korean and English. The man's dark eyes held a hint of amusement, but he maintained his professional demeanor. I understand the protocols. My name is David Park, and I'm Park. Naomi's eyebrows rose slightly. She knew every member of the Park family associated with the station. They were one of the founding families, and she had personally processed their security clearances for years. Sir, I've worked with the Park family for many years. I know all of them. Around them, the usual morning bustle had slowed to a crawl. Other employees were lingering, pretending to check their devices while watching the exchange with poorly concealed interest. Nayoung noticed Sunho from legal practically burning a hole in his coffee cup with his intense stare, and Yunji from operations had completely abandoned any pretense of walking to her office. David Park reached into his jacket pocket, and Nayoung's hand tensed near the security button. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if aware of her concern. I was adopted by Kita Park when I was 3 years old, he explained patiently. He's my father. Nayoung's fingers flew across her holographic keyboard, pulling up the Park family records. She had access to all personnel files as part of her security duties. I have no record of any David Park scheduled for today, she stated firmly. Perhaps you're at the wrong facility. I can direct you to the visitor center in Section C. The man's composure remained unchanged, but something flickered in his eyes. Not anger or frustration, but something else Nayoung couldn't quite identify. He opened his mouth to speak again, but a new voice cut through the tension in the lobby. Nayoung Si. The sharp call came from Han Gil, the head of it, who had been frozen near the security gate for the past few minutes. His face had gone pale, and his morning coffee was tilting dangerously in his trembling hand. That's Director Park. Nayoung's fingers stopped mid-type. Director. The new Chief Executive Officer, Han Gil continued, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent lobby. The world seemed to slow down around Nayoung as David Park reached into his jacket pocket again, this time pulling out an ID card she had only seen in security briefings, the highest-level access card in the entire Korean Space Administration, complete with the distinctive golden trim reserved for executive leadership. As I was trying to explain, David Park said, his voice still kind despite the situation. I'm the new CEO, Kita Park. Your former CEO is my father. He's retiring, and the board elected me as his successor 3 months ago. All employees should have received the memo about the leadership transition. Nayoung's mind raced back to her inbox, where an unopened message marked important. Leadership transition sat waiting. She had been so focused on maintaining security protocols that she had planned to read it during her lunch break, as she did with all non-emergency communications. The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the usual soft hum of the station's air recyclers seemed muted. Nayoung could feel the weight of every eye in the room on her as she stared at the golden-trimmed access card being held out to her. In that moment, all her years of training, all her pride in her perfect record, all her certainty about knowing every face that belonged in this building, it all seemed to collapse around her. The ground beneath her feet felt less solid than ever before, despite the station's artificial gravity being as stable as always. What happened next would change not just Nayoung's morning, but her entire understanding of her role in the station's complex social ecosystem. But that was a revelation still to come, as she sat there, frozen in what felt like the longest moment of her 15-year career, facing the man she had just denied entry to his own building. The story of how Nayoung, the most efficient and dedicated office manager in the Korean Space Administration, had to reconsider everything she thought she knew about security, belonging, and leadership was just beginning. And it all started on this ordinary morning that had suddenly become anything but ordinary. Time seemed to stand still in the lobby of the Stellar Communications Hub. Nayoung's hands hovered over her keyboard, her eyes fixed on the golden-trimmed access card that David Park held. The morning light streaming through the station's windows cast long shadows across the polished floor, making the moment feel even more dramatic. Instead of anger or disappointment, David Park did something unexpected. He pulled up a chair to Nayoung's desk and sat down. The simple action broke the heavy silence that had fallen over the lobby. Around them, employees who had been watching the scene unfold began to move again, though many still threw curious glances their way. "You know," David said, his voice warm and friendly, "I've read your security reports from the past 5 years. They're really impressive." Na-young blinked in surprise. Of all the things she had expected him to say, this wasn't one of them. She opened her mouth to speak, but for once, no words came out. David continued, "I especially like your proposal from last year about improving the station's emergency protocols. The board approved it last week. That's actually one of the reasons I came in early today." Na-young's mind went back to the thick report she had written 12 months ago. She had spent countless hours working on it, suggesting ways to make the station safer while keeping operations running smoothly. She had almost forgotten about it after submitting it up the chain of command. "Sir, I must apologize for my behavior," Na-young finally managed to say, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I should have checked the leadership transition memo more carefully." David leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Tell me something," Na-young sighed. "How many unauthorized access attempts has this station faced in the past year?" 27, sir," she answered without hesitation. "Mostly automated cyber attacks, but 3 were physical attempts to enter the building without proper clearance." "And how many were successful?" "None, sir." Despite her embarrassment, Na-young couldn't keep a small note of pride from her voice. "Exactly," David said with a smile. "That's because you take your job seriously. Maybe too seriously sometimes, but in our line of work, that's not always a bad thing." By now, most of the morning crowd had moved on to their offices, though Han-gil from it still lingered nearby, clutching his coffee cup like a lifeline. The lobby had returned to its usual quiet state, with only the soft hum of the station's systems in the background. David reached into his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. "I'd like to show you something," he said, activating the device's holographic display. A 3-dimensional map of the station appeared in the air between them, rotating slowly. "This is a security simulation I've been working on. I think you'll find it interesting." For the next hour, Na-young found herself deep in conversation with her new CEO about station security. David Park's knowledge impressed her. He understood not just the technical aspects, but also the human elements that made security work in practice. "You see this section here?" he asked, pointing to a part of the map. "The board wants to expand our communications capacity. We'll be handling transmissions from 3 new colonies next year. That means more staff, more access points to monitor." Na-young leaned forward, her earlier embarrassment forgotten as she studied the map. "The current security checkpoints won't be enough," she said, her mind already working on solutions. "We'll need to implement additional layers of verification." "My thoughts exactly," David agreed. "That's why I want you to lead the security upgrade project." Na-young's head snapped up in surprise. "Me, sir?" "Who better?" David asked. "You know this station's security systems better than anyone. More importantly, you've shown that you're willing to question anyone, even the CEO, if something doesn't seem right." A small group of late arrivals passed through the security gates, their footsteps echoing in the large space. Na-young automatically checked their IDs, her movements precise and practiced. David watched her work with approval. "Your attention to detail is exactly what we need," he continued. "Though perhaps we could work on making the verification process a bit more diplomatic." Na-young felt her face flush again, but she noticed the gentle humor in his voice. "Yes, sir. I'll work on that." "Good. Now about those new security protocols you proposed." David pulled up another holographic display, this one showing detailed technical specifications. "I have some ideas I'd like to discuss with you." As they dove into the technical details, Na-young felt something shift in her understanding of leadership. Here was someone who could have easily fired her for her mistake, or at least reprimanded her severely. Instead, he had turned it into a teaching moment and an opportunity for growth. The morning wore on, and more employees arrived for work. Each one who passed through security did a double take at the sight of their new CEO, sitting at the front desk, deep in conversation with the office manager. The scene was unprecedented in the station's history. "Sir," Na-young said during a pause in their discussion, "may I ask you something?" "Of course. Why aren't you angry about how I treated you earlier?" David Park was quiet for a moment, considering her question. "You know, when my father, Kita Park, first adopted me, many people had trouble accepting that I was really his son. They couldn't see past their preconceptions." He gestured at the space station around them. "But look at this place. Humans have built cities in space, established colonies on distant worlds, created technology that would have seemed like magic just a century ago. We've done all this by learning to see beyond our initial assumptions, by being willing to change our views when new information comes along." Na-young thought about her own assumptions, not just about David Park, but about security, about leadership, about what it meant to do her job well. She had always seen her role as keeping people out. Perhaps it was also about knowing when to let them in. "The security upgrade project starts next week," David said, standing up. "I'll have my assistant send you the details." And Na-young sighed. "Yes, sir. Keep questioning things that don't seem right. Just maybe give people a chance to explain themselves first." Na-young smiled, her first genuine smile of the morning. "Yes, sir. I will." As David Park walked toward the elevators, employees parted before him like water. But unlike earlier, when the atmosphere had been tense with embarrassment and shock, now there was a feeling of respect and something else. Hope, perhaps. Hope that change, even unexpected change, could be a good thing. Na-young turned back to her security screens, but her perspective had shifted. The cameras and sensors that had once seemed like walls keeping the outside world at bay now looked more like windows, tools for understanding who belonged and why, rather than just keeping people out. She opened her inbox and finally clicked on that leadership transition memo. As she read about David Park's impressive background and his vision for the station's future, she realized that sometimes the best security came not from building higher walls, but from knowing when to open the gates. The morning sun had risen higher now, its light creating new patterns on the lobby floor. Na-young watched as it illuminated the space in ways she had never noticed before, much like how her conversation with David Park had shed new light on her understanding of her role in this complex, ever-changing world they had built among the stars. 1 week had passed since Na-young's memorable first meeting with CEO David Park. The morning sun streamed through the station's windows as usual, but many things had changed in the stellar communications hub. Na-young sat at her desk, looking at her reflection in the polished surface. She was still the same person, but somehow everything felt different. The security upgrade project was set to begin today. Na-young had spent the past week preparing, reading through old reports, and studying the station's systems with new eyes. Her desk, usually spotless, now held several tablets displaying different aspects of the station's security setup. "Good morning," Na-young called a friendly voice. She looked up to see Mai from communications walking through the security gate, ready for the big project. "Good morning, Mai. Na-young replied with a small smile. "Yes, I think I am." The lobby had a different feel now. People still showed their IDs and followed security protocols, but there was a warmer atmosphere. Na-young had started greeting people by name more often, taking a moment to ask about their day. It was a small change, but it made a big difference. At exactly 9:00 a.m., her computer chimed with a message. The first project meeting would start in 30 minutes. Na-young had never left her desk during work hours before. Security was a full-time job, after all. But CEO Park had arranged for Jun-ho, her new assistant, to cover the front desk during project meetings. "I'll take over now," Jun-ho said, arriving right on schedule. He was young but capable, and Na-young had spent the past week training him in security procedures. "Good luck at the meeting." Na-young gathered her tablets and stood up. Walking away from her desk felt strange, like leaving a ship without its captain. But as she headed toward the elevator, she realized something important. The station's security didn't depend on just one person. It was about building a system where everyone worked together. The meeting room on the 15th floor was already half full when she arrived. Engineers from different departments sat around a large table, their own tablets displaying various technical diagrams. David Park stood at the head of the table, writing something on a holographic display. "Ah, Ne-young-si," he said warmly. "Please, take a seat here." He gestured to a chair near him, a spot usually reserved for senior management. Ne-young sat down carefully, arranging her tablets in front of her. She noticed some curious looks from the other staff members. Everyone had heard about what happened last week, of course. News traveled fast on a space station. "Now that we're all here," David began, "let's talk about the future of Station K-227 security. Ne-young-si will lead this project, with support from each of your departments." He turned to the holographic display, which showed a 3D model of the station. "As you know, we're expanding our operations. 3 new colonies will connect through our hub next year. That means more traffic, more data, and more security challenges." Ne-young watched as he highlighted different sections of the station, explaining the plan changes. She had studied these plans all week, but seeing them presented to the whole team made them feel more real. "Ne-young-si," David said, "would you like to explain your ideas for the new security protocols?" Taking a deep breath, Ne-young stood up. She had never presented to a group this large before. But as she looked around the room, she saw interested faces waiting to hear what she had to say. These weren't just colleagues anymore. They were partners in keeping the station safe. "Thank you, Director Park," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I've been studying our current security systems, and I've identified several areas where we can improve." She brought up her own display, showing a detailed diagram of the security checkpoints. "First, we need to upgrade our ID verification system. The current system works well, but with more traffic coming through, we need something faster and more accurate." To her surprise, the engineers nodded along with her ideas. Some even took notes. When she mentioned a potential problem with the new colony connections, Han Gil from it raised his hand. "I think I might have a solution for that," he said excitedly. "We could modify the quantum encryption protocols to handle multiple streams simultaneously." The meeting continued for 2 hours, with ideas flowing freely around the table. Ne-young found herself in the middle of technical discussions she would never have imagined being part of just a week ago. Her years of practical security experience combined perfectly with the engineer's technical knowledge. As the meeting wound down, David Park stood up again. "Excellent work, everyone. Ne-young-si, I'm impressed with how thoroughly you've analyzed our needs. I think we're off to a great start." People began filing out of the room, still discussing various aspects of the project. Ne-young gathered her tablets, feeling a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced before. This was different from her usual work. Instead of just following procedures, she was helping to create them. "A moment, please, Ne-young-si," David called as she reached the door. When the room had emptied, he turned to her with a serious expression. "How are you feeling about all this?" Ne-young considered the question carefully. "It's very different from what I'm used to," she admitted. "But I think I'm starting to understand something important." "Oh, what's that?" "Security isn't just about keeping people out. It's about creating a safe space where people can work together, where they can trust each other." David smiled broadly. "Exactly. That's exactly what I hoped you would see." He walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "You know, when my father first brought me to this station, I was just a child. Many people didn't know how to react to me. I was different from what they expected in a Park family member." Ne-young joined him at the window. The view of space always made her feel small, but today it felt more like a reminder of how much room there was to grow. "But my father taught me something valuable," David continued. He said that true leadership isn't about fitting people's expectations. It's about helping others see beyond their expectations. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the distant stars. Na-young thought about how much had changed in just 1 week. She had gone from being the strict guardian of the gate to someone who helped shape the station's future. "The security team needs a proper leader," David said suddenly. "Someone who understands both the technical and human aspects of the job. I'd like you to consider taking on the role of security director." Na-young turned to him in surprise. "Sir, but you've shown that you can learn and adapt. You understand the importance of both rules and flexibility. That's exactly what we need in a leader." He handed her a tablet with the official offer. "Think about it. Let me know by the end of the week." As Na-young rode the elevator back to her desk, she thought about everything that had happened. The tablet in her hand represented more than just a promotion. It was an opportunity to reshape how security worked on the station. Jun-ho looked up as she approached the front desk. "Everything okay?" Na-young said. "You look deep in thought." "Yes," she replied, smiling. "Everything is very okay." She took her seat again, looking out at the lobby with new eyes. The security gates were still there. The protocols were still important, but now she saw them as tools for building bridges, not walls. The morning sun had shifted, creating new patterns on the floor. Na-young watched as people passed through security, each one carrying their own stories, their own potential for surprise and growth. She had spent 15 years learning how to keep the station secure. Now she was learning something even more important: how to keep it open to new possibilities. 3 months had passed since Na-young's fateful first meeting with CEO David Park. The stellar communications hub looked different now. New security gates stood in the lobby, their sleek designs both welcoming and secure. But the biggest changes weren't the ones you could see. They were in how people worked together. Na-young sat in her new office on the 15th floor, looking through the large window at the stars beyond. The security director's office had always seemed so far away from the front desk where she had spent 15 years. Now it felt like home. Her computer chimed with a message. The newest colony in the Centaurus sector was ready to connect to their communications network. This would be the first major test of their new security systems. Na-young checked the time. 7:45 a.m. Right on schedule. "Security team, status report," she said into her communicator. "All systems ready. Director Na-young." Jun-ho's voice came through clearly. He had grown into his role at the front desk, adding his own warm touch to the security protocols she had created. Na-young stood up and straightened her new uniform. The security director's insignia still felt a little strange on her collar, but she was getting used to it. She headed to the main control room where her team was gathering for the colony connection. The control room buzzed with activity. Engineers checked displays, security staff monitored incoming signals, and everyone worked together like parts of a well-oiled machine. Na-young remembered how separate everything had felt just 3 months ago. "Good morning, everyone," she said as she entered. The room responded with warm greetings, so different from the nervous nods she used to get at the front desk. "Colony Nexus 7 is standing by," Han Gil reported from his station. "Their security codes check out perfectly." Na-young nodded, moving to the central console. The new security system they had built together filled the screens around her. It was elegant and strong, like a bridge made of light connecting their worlds. "Director Na-young," a familiar voice called. She turned to see David Park entering the control room. "I thought I'd come watch our new system in action." "Of course, sir. We're just about to begin." David smiled, looking around the room. "Quite different from that morning 3 months ago, isn't it?" Na-young felt her cheeks warm slightly at the memory, but she smiled too. That morning had changed everything, though not in the way she had feared at the time. "Start the connection sequence," she ordered, her voice clear and confident. The room hummed with energy as the new systems came to life. On the main screen, they could see the connection forming, a secure channel reaching across space to the new colony. Numbers and codes flowed across secondary displays as multiple layers of security checked and double-checked everything. Connection stable, Hangill reported. Security protocols functioning at 100%. A cheer went up around the room. Na-young felt pride swelling in her chest. Not the old pride of keeping people out, but a new pride in helping people connect safely. Excellent work, David said, addressing the whole room. This is exactly what we've been working toward. Security that brings people together instead of keeping them apart. After the excitement died down and the connection was running smoothly, David asked Na-young to walk with him. They headed to the observation deck, a quiet space with the best view of the stars. You know, David said as they looked out at space, when my father first brought me to this station, there was another office manager. He took one look at me and said I couldn't possibly be Kita Park's son. Na-young listened quietly. She had never heard this story before. My father could have had him fired, David continued. Instead, he took the time to teach him about family, about how love doesn't care about what people look like. That manager ended up becoming one of our strongest supporters. He turned to Na-young with a warm smile. That's why I knew, that morning when you stopped me at the desk, that you weren't being unkind. You were doing what you thought was right. The trick was helping you see a bigger picture of what right could be. Na-young thought about how much her view had changed. I used to think security meant building perfect walls, she said. Now I understand it's about building perfect connections. Exactly. And speaking of connections, David pulled out a tablet. The board has reviewed your work on the security upgrade project. They're very impressed. He handed her the tablet. On it was an offer for a new position, Chief of Interstellar Security Operations. Sir, this is... Na-young's eyes widened as she read the details. A big step up, yes. You'd be in charge of security for all our colonial operations. It means traveling to the colonies, helping them set up their own security systems, teaching them what you've learned about balancing protection with connection. Na-young looked back out at the stars. 3 months ago, she had never left her desk. Now she was being offered a chance to travel between worlds. You don't have to decide right away, David said, but I think you're ready for this. Later that day, Na-young went down to the lobby. Jun-ho sat at the front desk, greeting people with the perfect balance of warmth and professionalism that she had helped him develop. Everything okay, Director? He asked as she approached. Yes, she smiled. I just wanted to see how things were going down here. She watched as people passed through the security gates, each one acknowledged with respect and kindness. The lobby no longer felt like a barrier between inside and outside. It felt like a welcome center, a place where connections began. A group of visitors arrived, representatives from another colony. Jun-ho checked their credentials efficiently but warmly, making them feel welcome while maintaining security. You've done well with the desk, Na-young told him. Better than I did, in some ways. Jun-ho looked surprised. But you're the one who taught me everything. Not everything, she said softly. You taught me some things too, like how to smile more. That evening, as the station's day shift was ending, Na-young stood in her office one last time. She had made her decision about the new position. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter through her window, as if approving her choice. Her computer chimed with a final message for the day. It was from David Park, containing just a few words. The best security experts don't just guard doors. They open them. Na-young touched the security director's insignia on her collar, thinking about how far she had come from that morning 3 months ago. She had learned that true security wasn't about keeping things unchanged. It was about making sure that change could happen safely. Tomorrow, she would accept the new position. She would travel to the stars she had spent so long looking at through windows. But more importantly, she would help build new connections between worlds, between people, between different ways of thinking. The station's lights dimmed slightly, signaling the transition to night shift. Na-young gathered her things, ready to head home. As she walked through the lobby one last time that day, She paused to look at the security gates she had guarded for so long. They stood there, strong and secure. But now, they seemed different. They weren't walls anymore. They were doorways. And sometimes, the most important thing about a door wasn't keeping it closed, but knowing when to open it and having the courage to step through.